I'll say this much right up front. Do not read this book if you are arachnophobic. Like, just don't. The Children of Time. So this is a Patreon commissioned review. We'll put the link to the Patreon up right now because, yes, you can commission me to take a look at movies, TV shows, books, comics, etc. I've got a couple other books waiting on the back end. They do take me longer to get to and through, but this is the latest one that I've taken a look at. This was not a book I had heard of, and I really knew pretty much nothing going in. What I got was real good. So there's a part of me that like wants to put a spoiler warning up almost immediately, just because like I didn't even really know the base premise that this was going to be going with, and it was fun for me to find that out. So let me put it this way. This is a far future set. I don't know how solid the science is, but it feels like it's a harder sci-fi than you often get for this kind of spacefaring thing. It is really well thought out. It's really well balanced. It does great explorations of character in different ways of thought. And that is the most spoiler-free I feel like I can do. So like it has a certain tonal similarity to the Culture books by Ian M. Banks, which I've reviewed a few of. So if you've read any of those and you like those, definitely give this a shot. But that's the most spoiler-free. I'm not going to leap right into spoilers right off, but I am going to actually describe the initial premise, which, as I said, I didn't even know going in, and I kind of liked that I didn't. So this, we kind of have a prologue initially, where we see just the very last days of a great human empire, star-spanning empire. But this is a civilization that is about to destroy itself completely, like wipe itself out across the stars. But what happens right before that occurs is there is an experiment on a terraformed planet with, that has life down on it, and the intention is to set down a probe that has primates on it, has monkeys on it, and to infect the monkeys with a neurovirus that will speed up their evolution and do certain things to the way that they think. And this is this sort of masterwork of a scientist named Avrana Kern. But right when everything's supposed to kick off, it all goes to hell. And the result of that is that Avrana Kern effectively is in it's kind of a stasis pod orbiting the terraformed planet. She is alive in it, and she's uploaded her consciousness sort of mingled with the thing's computer, but there's also her physical body, which is kind of in suspension. And then down on the planet, the monkeys didn't make it. They burned up on entry. The neurovirus still landed, though, and it didn't do much for most of the population of the planet, which was made up of, species that originated from Earth. But there were a few that it kind of took to. Not fully in the way intended, but enough to impact what they were going to be. The major one of those are spiders. Now, after that prologue bit, what we have is a story jumping between two things. One is the gradual evolution of the spiders on the planet. And then the other is the Gilgamesh. Now, the Gilgamesh is a ship. It's an ark ship basically thrown together by the remnants of the human race. This isn't really the remnants of the Empire. The Empire's gone, but there were some people left around. But what the Empire did in the fall of it was so extreme that the planet itself, planet Earth, became unlivable. Not immediately, but eventually over time was poisoned by just the remnants of what the Empire had done and had left in place. And so you have this ship, the Gilgamesh, as the last vestige of humanity. They don't even really know that much about, like, they know how the ship works, they built it, but it's all built off of cobbled together and relearned imperial tech. They didn't develop this from scratch. They've scrounged it effectively. But they are trying to find a place to go because Earth, not sustainable anymore. And naturally, there's this lovely green terraformed planet. Now, the actual full meeting together of these two stories, there's a couple of points, but like the full true meeting of these forces isn't until the end of the book. So what you have is going back and forth, going through generation upon generation of the spiders, while keeping the same core cast of characters among the humans, because the what are called the key crew, the ones who are actively, I can talk, working the ship and directing it and making the decisions, as opposed to the cargo, which is all these humans in suspended animation. The key crew get woken up and put back into suspended animation intermittently so that they can survive for as long as it's necessary to find a new home. And so you have the key crew makes up most of the recurring cast. And how much they age depends on how frequently they're brought out and for how long a stretch. Whereas on the planet, you're just going through generation after generation of spiders. But there is still a consistency there because of one of the really neat ideas that goes along with this neurovirus, which is that it makes knowledge inheritable. So what that means is that any spiders bred, whatever knowledge the parents had up to the point where the eggs were laid and fertilized, whatever knowledge those parents had, the new offspring will inherit that knowledge. They don't have to relearn from scratch. And that compounds generation after generation. And one of the things that results from that is you get direct line descendants who are not a one-to-one, the same as their ancestors, but are similar enough that the book gets away with a core cast of spiders who are technically not the exact same spider from generation to generation, but are direct descendants in a way that means they have inherited all the knowledge and a lot of the personality. So we've got Portia, who's a warrior. We've got Beatrice, who is a thinker. And then there's Fabian, who's a male. And that's one of the other things. There was a lot of thought that went into the way spider society would develop. And I love the amount of thought put into this. Because one of the most boring things you can do with a premise like this, as far as I'm concerned, is basically just have what feel like two races of people, but one of them has 8 legs. Like, that's real boring. However, when you think about it, and think about the way that spiders communicate and their sensitiveness to vibrations, and the fact that their language would be communicated through tappings and physical motions generated, not through speech, not through auditory sound. Their hearing isn't very good. The way that they communicate, the way that they build things, and how their thoughts would compound over time, it's really well thought out. And through all of this, the satellite with Avrana Kern's mind and body is the wild card in this, because by the time this last remnant of humanity starts snooping around, Kern is kind of a mad god within the machine, is sort of where she's at that point. So she's an interesting wild card to throw into the mix on top of everything else. It is really, really well balanced. I think the timing of when it switched, because like the chapters just alternate. Spiders, people, spiders, people, spiders, people. So it's just a one-to-one, switching back and forth. But it really helps the flow, because I don't think necessarily that either the spiders or the people would get boring. But, there are sometimes you're like, I'm ready for a break from this. But the book kind of has built-in breaks. So like, here's a break from that story for another story. And yet you're still in the same book. And balancing that to have it feel like you're just getting the other side and not have it feel like one story is interrupting the other is not easy. It takes a lot of work to get that flow working, and it really works here. This is so good. The flow and the structure of this book are immaculate. They're fantastic. The human characters, our primary one is a classicist, which is kind of like a historian. And that is Holston. And I like him as a primary POV for the human side of the story. I say primary, it is pretty much just him, but we do get enough of the other characters that, you get a good sense of them. And one of the things I like, and this is like a tiny detail, but again, it just shows the thought that went into this. There's a point where some of the more technically minded people, like the engineer, is talking with the head scientist, and because it's from Holston's perspective, and he's a linguist and a historian, it basically just says they start talking in technobabble. Like, it doesn't record down exactly what the technical specs of stuff are, because we're getting it from the perspective of a guy who doesn't know. He doesn't know how that stuff works. That's not his job. And I love that. Again, just the amount of thought put into this is really good. And some of the characters end up having a surprising amount of depth. I don't know why I can't talk today. Like the commander of the ship, Guan, he has some interesting things going on with him, especially because at a couple of different points, like, you kind of think you've got him sussed out, then it's like, no, there is actually even more than I thought going on there. And it all tracked and it all made sense. I think, for want of a criticism, there was one human character who I didn't really care for. That was Vitas, who was the head scientist. I didn't like her very much. I think my issue with her is she felt the most like an archetype, and like not an archetype with something extra. Because, like, there's some of the other ones, like there's I think it was Karst. He's the head of security, and he's a little bit of what you'd expect, kind of a gung-ho, shoot first, a little bit of a meathead, but you get to know him enough to get enough of his personality that he doesn't feel like he's just that. But then you've got Vitas, and Vitas, she really doesn't evolve past the kind of, this is going to sound like a weird combination of words, but like the morally neutral, evil scientist. And what I mean by that is her focus is on like, oh, this would be a really fascinating thing to find out and to learn. And she's more interested in that than the actual moral questions. And the practical upshot of that is she's a problem, because she doesn't care about the moral questions, only the science. And that is a certain type of scientist archetype that's like, it's not an inherent problem. Like, heck, Entrapta was basically that in She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, but Vitas doesn't really feel like she has much going on other than that. And she's about the only character who I felt that way about. So I guess consider that praise by exception, which is the one character that I complain about means all the others are real good. And it's just so well put together and so well thought out. And the amount of thought that goes into just trying to figure out the thought patterns that would develop in a race of spiders, just because of fundamentally how their lives are different, how their understandings would be different, and the results in difference there. I think the one other thing that I'm impressed that this handled as well as it did, because it came close to irritating me. And I guess this I'll put a spoiler warning, because this kind of develops a little bit later in the book. This isn't like tail end. This isn't like ending spoilers, but a little bit more than I've said up to now, which is that the spiders do kind of develop a religion around what they call the messenger, which is the satellite that Kern, her body and her mind are in. Because part of that thing's function is it's sending a signal down to the planet with the intention that it will eventually get a response back from the monkeys. Of course, the monkeys aren't there, And the spiders can tell there's a signal coming from there. There's like this recurrent pattern, and they get that, but they don't know what it is. And so there is a religion developed around that. Now, what I appreciate about it is because of the whole thing with knowledge and talent and skills and information being inheritable, that means that like there isn't the sort of thing of like, oh, the mists of time and the obscuring of, because the story is told and retold and retold, it gets twisted. Like, that's not an issue for the spiders, because they know what happened. They have clear memories of what happened in the lives before their own. And so that does avoid a lot of the dismissing of religion as a, as a game of telephone and a twisting of questions into something harmful. I did say it kind of borderlines it. It does ultimately sort of come to not a particularly positive notion on religion as it goes, but it feels a lot more thought out than the usual, religion's bad and stupid, that I feel like a lot of sci-fi, particularly intellectual space that sci-fi, has a tendency to lean into. This doesn't really. Partially because like there's the open acknowledgement that what they eventually come to think of as God is actually there and tangible. And the perspective we get, and as they come to understand it, and there's also like an appreciation that at least initially the church, or the temple in their case, is sort of the heart of a lot of the early developmental leaps that the spiders make. But then as, questions seeking answers, when those answers can't be confirmed and those give rise to belief, and belief then gives rise to dogma, then the temple becomes a little bit of an impediment to further progress. And I do think that is explored well enough that it's earned. It does not feel like a flat out trashing of the notion of faith or religion. It is even at times acknowledging the strength and the help of that, but also pointing out like, yeah, at a certain point, thought processes and beliefs can kind of solidify in a way that becomes an impediment. And I feel like that is a criticism that is not, first of all, it's not the point of the book, so that helps. But that is an aspect that is a criticism of religion that feels way more earned in this than usually when I've seen swipes at religion being deployed in books like this. Which the only reason I dwell on this is because it's something I have complained about elsewhere. So I don't want people to think I'm like, I didn't notice. No, I did, but it's sort of the exception that proves the rule. This put in the work to earn the criticism it makes, whereas most things don't, which is why most things feel like cheap snipes to me, certainly in compared to something like this. And again, it's been a while since I've talked about it, so a quick reminder, I'm not personally offended if you want to bash religion in your work. I wasn't raised religious. I'm not currently religious. I just find it irritating and belittling and not very interesting. It's often done with a sense of superiority that I really don't care for and puts me off a lot of works. But anyways, it's not the case here, which was nice. Pretty much everything I have to say about this, other than like criticizing one character, this is good. This was real good. This was really thoughtful and really inventive. This was fantastic. Children of Time. I know there's 2 sequels. I have not been commissioned to read the sequels, so no promises that I ever get to those. But have you read this? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the views. Patreon pays the bills, and I already did the plug for it earlier. I need to go to bed. Patreon pays the bills. Link for it in the description. Also, like, share, subscribe, help me out as well. Don't worry too much about it, though. Take a relaxed attitude around here, as evidenced by the fact that I'm going to put this up with errors in it instead of edit them out. And so, just come on back next time you need a break. Ugh. And now to give thanks to my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfula, Goddess Elida, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Oliver B., Melissa Pedersen, Movie Turtle, Ulrich Bogdan, Loki Eris, Linda Walters, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Bernabe Likes the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Adam RDL Taylor, Pau Baraba Jago, Mira G, and Sir Didymus is my favorite. I don't know, it feels right that it's October the first time you're seeing all three of these at the same time.